last week I began with Philippians 1:6 and said this, being confident of this, that he who began a good work in you will carry it on to completion until the day of Christ Jesus.
Amen.
That's a great promise, isn't it?
Is.
And last week we talked about right at the start of our lives even, but more importantly for Deb, the start of her Christian journey was when he was 7, and for me when I was 25. And it's a long time ago. A lot of things have happened, since those times, but we can say thus far God has been with us, Ebenezer. Yeah. And that scripture is so true. I guess it's if we allow him to. I think sometimes he has to force our hand to get us to where he wants us to, if we stray and stuff. But he's for us. His heart is so big for his children that he can make that promise. If he starts something in our lives, then he's going to complete it.
Yeah.
Isn't it fantastic?
Really, really good.
So where we're going for tonight now?
So last week, you'll remember, if you didn't see last week, like John said, you can actually get it on the Facebook page, but if you want to see the updated version, you can get it on YouTube tomorrow. Mm-hmm. We ended last week when we felt it was time to leave Porth in 1997. John went to HQ without me. Remember we was talking about that, a massive life change, and the wife wasn't included back then. Yeah. And we got asked to go to Tanzania. So the process was, we said they want us to go and have a look. Yeah. Not knowing where this country was or anything about it. So we went, in 1997, we went for 2 weeks, didn't we? To have a look-see. Yeah,
May it was, because I'd already planned a preaching trip to Gambia in West Africa. And so I went there with a colleague on this preaching trip, and in the meantime, East Africa had been starting to go on the boil. So I came back, and 2 weeks later, I came back from West Africa, and 2 weeks later, we were on our way to East Africa, just for a couple of weeks. And you've heard me tell the story of the flight out there, and we...
it wasn't a great start, was it?
It wasn't a great start, no. We were sat at the airport on the plane, and the captain came on and said, sorry, we can't take off, we have a problem. And we heard them then starting to fix it, and we sat there.
Never a good thing if you can hear them fixing a plane.
And he said, okay, we fixed it. And then we're ready kind of to go, finally set off. And the captain came on again, and he said, oh, so sorry, we've discovered another problem now with the fuel system. So we thought, oh, nice. And we sat again. So by now it's a couple of hours and we're still on the plane, and they fixed that. And then we actually taxied down to the runway, and we were about to take off, and the captain came on again, can you imagine? And he said... He said, sorry, we're going to have to go back because somebody wants to get off.
I'm like, I want to get off. Never mind. Anybody else wants to get off?
Oh, dear. I think it was somebody who said they were ill, wasn't they? And they want to get off. We were all thinking...
Can we all get off?
Can we all get off? And it was the bumpiest flight. But in that, up to that point, I'd flown on military aircraft, and many, many times I'd flown, but that really was the bumpiest flight. And you've heard my story about this, that I developed a fear of flying, and it was because of that flight and what was going through our minds at the time. And I had to defeat that, obviously, later. We were going to move. At that point, we weren't moving, but subsequently we moved 5,000 miles away from home, so you're going to have to do a bit of flying, aren't you, at that point? But, so that was the start of our... East African adventure, wasn't it?
Yeah, so we landed in Nairobi, Kenya, for this 2-week look-see. We left the children who were 6 and 7 at home with my parents so that we could go and take a look at this unknown country in which we were being asked to consider this role. And so we landed in Nairobi. Alan and Anne Renshaw had been Elim's missionaries in East Africa for over 40 years.
40 years, yeah.
And we were coming to take over from them.
They were in Zimbabwe as well, weren't they? Yeah, in Africa.
So he picked us up from the airport, and they took us to this place. Yeah, it does sound like we're on You've Been Framed, Pauline. You're right. Took us this place, but it was a bit like a hostel, really, wasn't it?
Yeah, in Nairobi.
In Nairobi,
yeah.
and I was so scared from the minute I got off the plane because it was just so unknown. And we got this spray called Doom. If you know anything about Africa, Doom is everywhere, and it's you can.
Lola will know exactly.
It does what it says on the tin, and it kills anything in its wake. And so, the kind of rule that you began to live by was before you go to sleep at night, you spray your room, and then you go for your evening meal, come back, and you trust everything that was alive is dead, and you get in your net and fall asleep. Well, this was our first ever night in Kenya, and John sprayed so much Doom, I thought we were all going to die.
On your behalf, yeah.
Yeah, even Alan next door, he'd heard the going on for ages and ages, and then you soon realise that all you need is a quick spray, then you shut the door and get out. But we must have sprayed half a can, so nothing survived. But I lived in a kind of like a fear, and I hated it. It was so hard on your emotions and your senses, and the mosquitoes absolutely ate me alive. You didn't touch you, did you? You didn't get one bite. They all made up for it on me. They saw the plane open, and they go, "Well, here she is," and they attacked me. So I got bitten.
They didn't like the way I tasted.
Didn't like the way you tasted, no.
I've subsequently been bit a lot with other things, actually.
Yeah,
but,
not mosquitoes as much.
No.
But mine, they used to.
Yeah.
In part 2 Africa, which we'll get to either next week or the week after, it wasn't. I still used to get bitten, but not quite as severe. It's 97 because they didn't just get bitten; they used to turn into horrible blisters and stuff, and it was rough.
Well, we weren't experienced as we are today. This is 20 years ago. Remember, guys, more than 20 this time. Yeah. This is 97. So 23 years ago, we didn't know what we know now. And a lot of the point of why we're sharing this story is, as Deb said last week, you see us as very positive people, and we are. We're overcomers, and we preach a positive message. But we've been through it to get to that. We've really been through it to get to that place. And I wish I'd have really known this. I picked this quote up today from Ruth Graham, who is Billy Graham's daughter, of course. She said, "Fear not tomorrow, for God is already there. Fear not tomorrow, for God is already there." Yeah. And I subsequently learned this, that when you go anywhere in God, when you travel, when He asks you to go, and particularly at that time, Tanzania was one of the poorest countries in the world. It still is, but it was even further down the ladder then, and come out of a socialist kind of setup, and extremely poor at that point. And we were on our way to live there. At this point, we didn't think we would, but I learnt later this phrase, and I've used it so many times since: grace is awaiting your arrival. Grace is awaiting your arrival. And as I say, I really didn't know that. I couldn't think lines like that in those days, because we hadn't overcome fears. We hadn't overcome some of the issues we've learnt to overcome, partly because we've lived in Tanzania for 9 years now. But anyway, let's talk a bit about that 2 weeks.
So the 2 week 2 week trip was a very tough 2 week, and there was one highlight. I can only think of one highlight, which I'll get to, but a couple of funny stories now that when I look back, I think, I was ridiculous, because we were on the road for 2 weeks because they wanted to show us a wide variety, because it was 5 countries, not just Tanzania. When we went this time in 98, it was a massive job to do in lots of different countries. So we did a whistle-stop tour of a lot of places. I think only the 2 countries, wasn't it? Kenya and Tanzania, but lots of places.
Covered a lot of miles.
So we were in, and I hesitate to say the word hotel because you'll get the totally wrong impression. So I'll say hostel, like a YMCA type places all over the place. And if there was a hole in a door, if there was a hole in a window, I would get toilet paper. I sound so pathetic now. toilet paper and stuff every hole I possibly could so that nothing could get in and eat me, kill me. I was a bit of a wimp.
And often there'd be a big hole in your mosquito net.
Yeah, they were useless.
You immediately
actually.
think, well, what's the point of that? You could get a donkey through there. Never mind a mosquito. I mean, and it's just there. It'll be left, you know. They won't change it. So it's new things.
Mm-hmm.
When you go out in the mission field, there's we didn't do this, but there is necessary cross-cultural.
We should have done it. It's ridiculous that we didn't do it.
Cross-cultural
but
training.
we didn't do any training.
No, we didn't do any. Yeah, but part of that was, as we'll get to, I was ill, wasn't I? And anyway, yeah, it was rough.
So it was rough, and then this one, and it gets one of the hardest things for me was it gets dark. There's no evenings in Tanzania at all the way through the year. By about 6:30, it's pitch black, and so you would go to a church around 4:30 because they don't. Africans like to be home kind of before it gets too dark, and so evening services used to start between like 4:30, where it just started to get a little bit dusk. And this one particular church we went to, there were no windows, so there wasn't a toilet roll big enough on the planet for me to stuff these windows. There were no windows, and so as the lights went on in the church, every about twice a year, and they picked the time I was there. About twice a year, if you've ever seen a termite mound, big things made of sand, about twice a year termites leave those nests and come and have a little fly about. Well, they chose this night to do so, and I love John preaching, but this particular night I could not wait for him to shut up because they started
preach for 2 hours.
they cut, and it is longer because there's interpretation. So they all started these things that were like flying birds. They weren't that big, but it felt like they were flying in through the window and dropping. I was on the front row and they were dropping on me, and John must have seen the absolute fear in my face. They were everywhere. Nobody was bothered except me. In fact, the kids were taking the wings off and eating them. It was all fun and games for them. I was absolutely mortified. And that was a night I'll never forget. And it was like constant, I'm never coming to live here. I am never coming to live here. There's no way they're getting me here. I'm going to go back to lovely Wales, where there's no mosquitoes.
Wales seemed amazing, didn't it?
Wales seemed amazing. Yeah. And the positive that we got, so that gave us the slightest glimmer of hope that we might do this, was when we went to visit the school that the kids were going to go to. And it was an international school. It was absolutely beautiful, great building, lovely surroundings, really small class sizes, a great feel to it. And it was there where I had 5 minutes where I thought, yeah, I think I could perhaps do this. Quickly went away, but
It was your only.
It was my only. Perhaps I could do this if I could have lived at school, maybe.
Yeah.
So anything else.
The night of the termites was the second time I'd ever preached in Tanzania. A couple of days before, preached in a church that had no roof.
No roof.
And they were sat on breeze blocks.
Oh my goodness.
The people. It was such a poor place, and again, I was sort of in full flight with an interpreter. It started to rain heavy, so
that was the end of the meeting.
So the meeting had to be abandoned.
Yeah.
So twice I was preaching, and twice the meeting got abandoned.
I didn't get abandoned with the termites.
We finished early. You
finished early because I was petrified.
Yeah, so
horrible.
I think a point to be made is it's never easy. When God calls you, or God is going to do something lasting in your life, it's like the evil one has access to the process. Of course he does. He's able to hear conversations you're having. If you're praying out loud, he's able to hear the prayers, and it's obvious he's going to step in the way. He's going to try and block something if it's a threat to him. So we as we say, we were on the road a lot, travelling around in the highlands in Kenya, a place called the Aberdares, which is same name as Aberdare in Wales, actually. And I kind of kept getting a thrill about the prospect of it, but at the same time, at the same time,
I got no
it was
prospect
like,
of it.
God, this is hard, you know. And wow, and I wasn't getting any lullabies. I wasn't getting much feedback in a positive sense from Deb. So and after 2 weeks, obviously we flew back.
I couldn't wait to get home.
Both of us by that time really felt we are not going to East Africa. We felt Wales is wonderful in comparison.
There's a bit of a pattern there, isn't there, where we say we're not going somewhere and then it works out.
Yeah, indeed.
So July 97, so this is like 2 months after we came back, we had our speech ready for our boss, Brian Edwards. I weren't our boss then, was he? He was the missions director, wasn't he? Well, he soon became our boss.
Dennis Phillips was there.
We had our speech. Was Dennis there too at that meeting?
No, he was our regional boss.
We went to this meeting. We had all worked out, didn't we? What we were going to say.
We did.
Basically, thank you, but no thank you. We won't be going.
Yeah.
And we came out of that meeting, booking our tickets. And I still don't know.
We still don't know.
To this day, I don't know what happened in that room to change our minds. Obviously, God did something, but I can't remember it.
I think it started when I saw the gun under his jacket. But seriously, we honestly don't know.
I don't know.
It had to be God because it changed our thinking. But it was only the beginning of quite a journey. Up to we didn't actually go till
a year after, wasn't it?
Yeah, in June, the end of June in '98.
Yeah,
and we'd already begun the process then of having decided we were going. We were pastoring. We had a church plant, as well as our main church in Wales, in Porth. We had a church in Treorchy, which is further up the valleys. And we'd made our move from our main church, and we were still looking after the church plant, obviously waiting for the right time. And I developed a lump on the back of my head, and I had a biopsy, and they said I had to go in and have it removed. And so I went into hospital to have it removed, and thankfully it was benign, but it was a worrying time, and the stress of everything, having left one thing in preparation for another.
And that was horrible. Leaving Porth was awful, wasn't it? It was very traumatic.
Yeah. It's the only church we pastored. Our kids had been born, and we had a lot of friends there and what have you. So we were kind of weakened, weren't we? And what was supposed to happen, to cut a long story short, sometime I think in March or April.
February it was, no? February
was it?
You were going.
I was supposed to go for a month. And it was just after I'd been in hospital, and I phoned Brian Edwards, again our missions director, and said I'm not fit to go. And he said, meet me in London, you'll be okay. And I thought, I don't want to leave Deb for a month, I don't feel well enough to go. All those kind of thoughts were going through our minds. And I said, Brian, I need to be straight with you, I'm not going. And he said, oh, come on, I'll be there for you. And you get on that plane, you'll be okay. I said, honestly, you're underestimating how I feel. I'm not going. And I didn't. So we thought then that's the end of us in Elim. We really thought, where do we weren't pastoring. I wasn't going out of the mission field, and it was we were rescued really by a man who Alan and Joan know very well, Gordon Hills, and I had to meet with the Elim leaders again, and I was expecting him to say, well, John, it's over for you, we don't know what to do. And Gordon Hills stepped in and he said, you need a 3 months break. And I said, really? He said, yeah, and then if you're well enough, you go after 3 months. And it was like, wow, he's bought us some time.
Yeah, we needed someone to make decisions for us, didn't we?
Yeah, and Gordon made that decision, and he gave us a few options, and he said, just go and sit in a church for 3 months. And he said, you could go there, or there, whatever. And we went to into Birmingham, Solihull actually, which was a man called David Carr's church. And we moved there, the kids went to school there, and both of us, we just supported, but I didn't do any ministry. We just recovered. And early on in that 3 months, David Carr, who some of you would know, is a very prophetic guy. And I was actually on the floor in a prayer meeting, and he came and lay next to me on the floor. And the first time anybody had ever done that, and began to speak to me and prophesy. And he said, God has just shown me that it's winter, but by June, it gave me a date, spring will have come. And that's what happened.
Yeah.
3 months later, we got on a one-way flight as a family, and we set off into a new world. And by this time, because of the delay, there was no handover. And just a little indication of the kind of situation we went into is, after a while, you don't feel this, but you certainly feel it as you step out of your security. Alan and Anne, the previous missionaries there, had by now come home. They finished because they'd retired. So we had no handover. And on the day they left, their best friends, who were missionaries from Norway, the man in the relationship was shot dead by robbers. And so you're gathering all this stuff, and we had a big family. When I say big family, I mean aunts, uncles, cousins, meal in Halifax in Yorkshire, and it was kind of
before we left.
To say Godspeed, best wishes. Most of them non-Christians, and I was having my aunties coming up, and they'd look at our 2, 6 and 7 they were, weren't they, and said, John, do you really think you should be taking them children, into that malaria, and and you'll be robbed, won't you? And think, they were putting so many thoughts into our heads, weren't they? And
it was again, we didn't know what we know.
No. It's like you take on board the lie. Somebody who texted me this week was talking about that, how strong the lie can be, that you take hold of, and God usually has something good, because grace is awaiting your arrival.
Yeah.
And so we got on that plane and we flew to Tanzania. We got off at the other end, and were our kids like?
Well, if you've ever been in the back of a car, so this time we landed in Tanzania, Kilimanjaro. The airport was a shed and a road. That's the best way to describe it. It's a bit more advanced now, not much, but it is.
It is relatively. It is, yeah.
And so you get off the plane, the heat hits you, the smells hit you, and we got picked up at the airport. And if you've ever travelled in a car with a 6 and 7-year-old, unless they're unconscious asleep, they're not quiet. Well, our 2, Chris and Beth, did not say one word. I didn't say a word either. And I was like, what are we doing? Anyway, let me just read something here. So the day finally arrived, June 28th, 1998. All our goodbyes were said. Goodbyes are terrible, awful, and they don't get any easier either. And we were on our own. John, 39, me, 29, Chris, 7, and Beth, 6. June 28th. As we travelled to Heathrow, both John and I saw a perfect cloud map of Great Britain in the sky. God's promise that we would be back and God would be our protection. Found out a few days later that my mum had had the same experience, except she saw clouds shaped like Africa. You are great, God. Thank you. And for those of you that know us, we're not really cloud in the sky type people, but that particular day was very clear for both me and my mum. And it was just like, even though it wasn't going to be easy, especially for me, God gave us that positiveness of travelling to the airport, that we were going to be all right and we would survive and we would be back and everything was going to be all right. But my goodness, it was a learning curve, wasn't it?
Yeah. And because there'd been no handover, we'd never seen the house that we were going to live in originally. It was in Arusha in Tanzania. And we got there, and as you would know, and certainly our dear African brothers and sisters know, you know, most of the time you have to live with security, high security. Certainly an expat in Tanzania lives with security. You know, I'm talking about guards now. And we arrived at this property. And
we were house sitting, weren't we, for some missionaries? We didn't know them either.
No, and they'd obviously got used to it, but there were holes in the fence, and the guard who was on Mzee, which is Mzee means
wise old man.
Wise old man. You know, I'm Mzee now. Everybody of a certain age is referred to as Mzee.
When you get grey, you become Mzee.
I think I became Mzee before I got grey.
Did you?
I don't know. But anyway, he was 73, and he was a short guy.
No,
I mean, really short, 5 foot, 73. And I looked and thought, he's not keeping much out.
If we get robbed tonight, we've got no chance.
We get robbed tonight. So our first night, anyway, we put the kids in their room.
Oh, it's so fun looking back.
Oh dear. And we had our room, and I said, oh, they need to come in with us. So I got the kids, piled them in the room. And, you know, we're smiling a lot now, but you have to kind of go back with us too. It's the unknown. It's landing somewhere you don't know anybody, you don't really know what to do. And I went into the living room of this house, Deborah, with the kids. I started to cry, and I said, God, what have I done to my family? I felt so insecure. And, you know, I'd been in all sorts of situations in my life, particularly military stuff and that, but never when I, you know, with the kids where I knew I didn't have the capability to look after them or protect them. It was too unknown.
Everything unknown.
Yeah.
Everything. You couldn't say, oh, we'll go to Tesco. So that would be something familiar.
There's no supermarkets.
A supermarket, doctors, dentists.
Yeah.
Every single thing was new. We had 2 little children, and I wrote on the next day. We arrived in Tanzania today. I felt quite scared, wondering if we'd made a mistake. It's a totally new ball game, and the unknown and untried is scary. I felt I would like to go home. God is my refuge and strength. We are in a home which is not our own, surrounded by strange things. It's tough. I didn't sleep well.
No, and in fact, we weren't going to come home for 2 years. We didn't know that at the time.
That then.
But we
probably wouldn't have got on the plane if I'd known that.
We didn't step back into Britain for 2 years, and at first we couldn't shake that off. It was like, is that clean? We got the milk straight from a cow in those days. They didn't have pasteurised milk, so you had to boil the milk. You know, it's just new stuff that after a while, it's nothing to you. But the first few weeks, and I say this, you know, we've been encouraged, particularly by Alan on his devotionals in recent times, to encourage and, you know, to share your faith, encourage. And I know some of you've heard me say this in a sermon, but it was a big thing. We got a card through, and in those days, no email either, you see, and mobile phones were only just coming in. We'd never had a mobile phone in our lives at that point of our lives, so communication was very difficult, and you had to go into town to a box. Of course, there was no delivery of mail, so we got the mail this particular day, and we had a card in it from a friend we met in Israel, actually, not from our own church, and she said, I feel strongly that God has asked me to share Psalm 121 with you. And of course, if you know this psalm, it's, I look to the hills, where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. And I was on what I do a lot to this day, a prayer walk, just wandering and talking to the Lord and listening. And I literally lifted my head up, you know, and said, and a breakthrough came.
Changed for you that
It changed for me, not for you. But I knew I'd just suddenly been strengthened that, come on, you may not be able to look after your family, but I can, kind of thing. And this is going to be okay. And it was like a glimmer of light. You know, it didn't all change for me overnight by any means.
But I think because you got stronger, that made it a little bit easier for me. When we were both struggling, that was probably more difficult, wasn't it?
Yeah, let me just say this before you read that. You see, on top of that, we had to live with the reality that my role there wasn't to pastor a church.
No.
It was to oversee East Africa. So it meant I was going to be on the road in Kenya and Uganda and Rwanda and in refugee camps and all Burundi refugee camps. So it was the prospect of our lives ahead that Deb was going to be on her own with the kids as well, and we were just contending with being new missionaries, and only those, I guess, who've done it understand that, don't they? Particularly if it's under circumstances where you're late going, so there's no handover, and you just, we were just pitched into it, and we had great support from Elim. All in those days, and subsequently through Paul Hudson, who is now our regional. When we've been there, it was a different situation. We weren't actually Elim missionaries; we were under Elim Global. But Paul became a very good friend and looked after us very well. So there we were, new days in a new country, in a new role, with a 6 and 7 year old who were getting used to it. Mm-hmm.
We laughed and cried many times. Well, John laughed and I cried. It's probably a better way of putting it.
Oh dear.
One precious moment in our early days was the morning that Beth, who was 6, got up and told us that she'd seen an angel.
Yeah.
Remember, she was only 6 and we hadn't spoken much at all to her about such things, and we absolutely believed she was telling the truth. And this is how the conversation went. I saw an angel last night, Mummy. Oh, I said, where was it? Sat on the edge of my bed. I'm going to get emotional. He had wings, and he said to me, everything's going to be all right. And it was just a sweet moment because, again, if you don't know us, you heard us talking about clouds in the sky and angels, and it's not really our go-to, that. So that's how I knew these things were real, and that she'd, seen this angel, and the angel, had told her that we were going to be all right. We have so many things to contend with, and another thing that really bothered me at first was geckos, if you know what a gecko is. And I always imagined that it was going to fall on my head or fall in my drink, and I became to love them. We called them all Gordon, didn't we, eventually?
They live inside your house.
Live inside your house, and it was in the kids' bedroom one night, and me and John just both, did the eye movements. Oh, there's one there, don't let Beth see it, she'll freak out. And so all of these things, were really tough, and school was brilliant for the kids. It was wonderful, and we got to go on holiday to Mombasa, which was absolutely amazing. So there were some highlights, but the actual, I would even say the whole experience of those 2 years, for me especially, because I didn't know what I know now, and I'm sure that even when I read this book, I hardly recognise myself because I'm so not that woman anymore. But I was, and that's why, to reiterate, it's another reason why we're doing this story. We missed, the hardest thing was missing big events, like I missed my nan's 80th and I missed my sister's 21st, and we couldn't do FaceTime in them days, so it was very difficult and different to communicate. So we couldn't do...
2-week turnaround by letter, wasn't it?
It was, and we missed Christmas twice at home, and I love Christmas, as you can see. And so to be in 100-degree sunshine, my Father Christmas was on a camel, and we were singing carols and with sweat dripping down. It wasn't quite the same, and of course you weren't with your family. So there were just so many things that, were bombarding us. And I think probably a big thing for me was I didn't really have a purpose there, did I?
No.
I didn't have a ministry at that point. As I was a housewife and mum, which is absolutely great. But for me, I thrive on doing stuff. So I eventually got involved in teaching piano.
And I was away a lot, wasn't it?
John was away a lot, so that was my job really. So it was a bit more difficult for me because I wasn't personally building anything. We did one massive highlight again for me was we did the musical Godspell, in which I auditioned and got a part for that, and that was a real community booster. Got to know a lot of people doing that, and we had our 20th anniversary last year. Actually, had a bit of a reunion online, which was great. Yeah. So that was a highlight, and the school was a highlight too because that became our community. We made friends again. We made friends for life there, and so there were some good moments, but it was a tough couple of years. And so when we eventually were coming home on furlough in the year 2000, we were beyond excited to come back to the UK, weren't we?
We were, and by that time we were starting to think of our second term because we had settled in, and on the ministry side, as I got stuck into it, I was often away, as I've said previously, but I was doing things I never dreamed I'd be doing. I did famine relief at one time with a couple of guys from the UK, and we literally took the food into villages and saw swarms of people. It was like a movie, people having to shift from where they lived because there was no food, and malaria, people just on their feet and walking through mud. It was the rainy season, things like that I'd never imagined I'd experience. And again, you know, I've mentioned certain things. One particular trip, and we were going to baptize. We were going to ordain as the overseer. I was the one to ordain some Burundian pastors into Elim there, and they were in a refugee camp in western Tanzania, which was miles away. It's a huge country, and we were pondering whether to go across the country or not, because there were Somali bandits there, and it was highly dangerous to be on those kind of roads through the bush. So I conferred with a couple of a Kenyan and Tanzanian pastor who were going with me, and we decided we can't risk it. So we had to go from Tanzania up into Kenya to Nairobi across into Uganda to Kampala we went. Then from Kampala right through Uganda into Rwanda on the road. I was the driver on the road, and then back into Western Tanzania, and that was the story I told the other week when we got the border reopened. But we started to see things as well. We had something like 300 churches in East Africa at the time, all told, and we started to see things, and people started to visit as well, which was fantastic for us, wasn't
getting
it?
visitors from the UK was
the first
amazing.
one was led by the evangelist Marilyn Harry and a team, and they came over, and we saw an outstanding miracle. I was with me, Debbie wasn't, but we were in a village, and it taught us something about spiritual warfare, because Marilyn was preaching the first night in a very Islamic place. But there was no response whatsoever, and Marilyn gets response, you know, and ministers and sees people saved, and nothing happened, and it perplexed us all as a team of us. And so we said, right, we're going to fast tomorrow and then pray, you know, at the night before we go out again. And we got all kinds of insights into the darkness that was there and what to pray for. And we attacked it went into spiritual warfare, and that night it changed. People started to get saved and come forward, and we went to a village then, quite a way out of the town, up into a village where we eventually opened a medical clinic, actually, and we prayed for this deaf and dumb girl, and it was like a biblical situation. She was 12 years of age, never spoken in her life, and we prayed for her, and she said, Mama, Baba, Mummy and Daddy were her first words. It was like, wow. It was just incredible because of the response of the village people, including some who were Muslims as well, who realised what they'd seen and had never heard this little girl speak before, and heard her starting to speak. And we had one other thing that we'll never forget. In Kenya, we prayed with an AIDS victim there called Alice, 21 years of age she was, and she was on the last throes of life. Her hair had dropped out and things. And I wasn't the only one praying for her, but I was one of them. And in all honesty, I looked at her and thought, my dear, you know, she'd been raped actually and caught AIDS. And my heart was breaking for her. And I felt, I'm not sure we'll get a result here, she's dying. And anyway, we prayed, you know, and as we said, there was really difficult ways it was difficult to communicate in those days in East Africa. But a couple of weeks later, we got a letter from her friends, and the letter said, we want to tell you the wonderful news that Alice is totally healed. And we went back to that place in Kenya a little while after, and she was part of the ministry team praying for people.
Awesome.
It was just, again, fantastic indication of God's ministry. And I need to quickly add this because I've said it several times, guys. It was during those days where I began to really seek God for why don't we see more miracles? Because at times I was praying for people and I was their only hope. And because I was the white missionary there, it's like the man of God's there, you know, hopes are built up. And I've said to you before, I used to think, oh dear, are they relying on me? I'm not sure, you know, that I'm going to get a result here. It was really hard in the bush to see people who had no other opportunities to get well because there's no medical facilities for miles. And it really broke my heart for people, and I could even cry now thinking about it, to be honest.
Yeah, we had some very tough emotional days with what we saw and what we experienced, and like John said, some great moments as well, where when both sets of parents managed to come and visit, which was very special. My mum and dad came out for a month after we'd been in Tanzania for a year, and they came in 99. They came for a month, and you can imagine the fun that we had with Chris and Beth being little as well, and their grandparents coming. But the day that they left was a really, really awful day, and that's why I said to you before that goodbyes are awful, and the price that grandparents pay, and I'm not going to read it, but I wrote a poem about that because I wrote.
You should read it.
Oh no, I'll probably cry.
Oh,
I wrote a poem about we pay a price as and we never used to like calling ourselves missionaries because missionaries are the ones that went 100 years ago, and but
most never came back.
Grandparents, I felt pay a higher price because of not seeing, their grandchildren and stuff. So there was lots of emotion, and so just to start to wind things up. Wow, it goes fast, doesn't it?
No, it does actually.
We began to look at the year 2000 coming home on furlough. Strange word, but it actually does mean when missionaries come home from the field to do their
used
UK.
COVID now, isn't it?
Yeah, of course, yeah. UK or wherever they're based work, and so for us that meant going around churches, and we used to wheel our little children out, didn't we? Everywhere we went, because they were cute singers, and they used to sing songs and show the slides and talk about our life and things like that. And like John said, we got ready then in the August of 2000, so we were home for about 4 months, I think, 3 or 4 months, travelling around, and absolutely loved it. Our first food experience when we came back was Little Chef. I feel like I'd be a bit more classy now.
It was breakfast.
But anyway,
full English.
We had a full English for 2 years. So we went for a full English, which was great.
Yeah.
And so August 2000, we were there ready to go back. Still, it was very hard to say goodbye to parents again and friends, but we were committed, weren't we? So we thought we were committed for another 3-year term.
So we've been 6 years altogether after that, yeah.
Well, yeah.
By the time we signed it,
yeah. And we'd been back in Tanzania for about a month, and things went wrong or right, depends which way you want to look at it because of what we learnt. But
it was wrong.
I'll let you.
Things went wrong for a
long
good
time,
while, didn't they?
yeah.
Yeah, they did. Yeah, we were getting back into it, and our good friend, who a number of you on here know, of course, Dennis Phillips, came out to do a leaders' conference with me. And we gathered the leaders in Arusha, where we lived, actually. So they travelled from all the countries we covered, and we had a great 3 days. It was, as they usually were, because you had a lot of organising to do, very stressful. And Dennis and I ministered between us, and we thought, great, we've had a great success. And that afternoon we went, Sunday afternoon, we went to a group of missionaries who we used to fellowship with and have a Sunday afternoon meeting with, and Dennis spoke there, and it was nice, and you know, Dennis ministered and we came home, and little did I know that night I was going to collapse. And I got out of bed, and I didn't really know what was wrong with me. I had palpitations quite a bit, and, you know, put it down to the stressful way I was living at times, travelling all over East Africa and into dreadful situations, and one that I'd been in recently before we came home on that furlough was in Rwanda, and we were the first healing missionaries into Rwanda after the genocide, and obviously it happened before that, but there's still places where to make their point of what had happened, the bodies were just left where they were slain, and I was in a place where hundreds of people had been massacred, and bodies and skulls were all over the place, and it was like, this is real, but it seems like a film. You know, it can't be real. People, there were instruments stuck out of people's skulls. Excuse me being graphic, but just to get an idea of, you could see how they died. There were hip bones stuck out of a pair of trousers. Mm. There were skulls still with hair on and scarves on. An unmistakable African scene of just incredible devastation, where 800,000 people were murdered, massacred in a 3-month period between April and July, and most of them with what's called a panga. We call it in East Africa panga. It's a machete. Dreadful, dreadful, dreadful evil on planet Earth, and I saw it firsthand. The result of it, of course, and maybe that had a big effect. I don't know, but anyway, this night I got up to go to the loo and just collapsed, and we had a stone floor in our house, so I smashed my head open, and I laid there for a good while, bleeding from my head. And Dennis Phillips was with us, as Deb will mention in a moment. He was in another room, and I got up and sort of made my way back in. I said, Deb, I'm in trouble here. And anyway, do you want to?
Yeah, so we phoned, we had a very good friend of ours who was a doctor, and I phoned him and said, John's ill, something wrong, and Mark said to me, is he breathing? Which I remember being taken aback at that question, and I said, yeah, he's breathing. So anyway, he said for me to drive John. There's no ambulance, so he couldn't phone emergency services. So we got him in the back of our Land Rover. Thankfully, Dennis was there, because I had to go and wake him up. He had his, you won't mind me telling you, his blue striped pyjamas on. And I had to wake him up and say, Dennis, John's sick, I've got to take him to hospital, you know, can you stay here with the kids and stuff? So of course he did that.
And it's 2 o'clock, actually, wasn't it?
Yeah, because it was early hours, and the only reason the clinic was open was because the President of the United States was in town, so it had to stay open.
It had to be a medical facility.
Yeah, so we were fortunate. And so we went, and we ended up going to Nairobi, didn't we, for further tests. Yeah. And the doctors said that they felt John needed a pacemaker. John said, how much will that be? Because you pay for everything in Africa for your medical things. And the doctor said, I don't know, we'll barter for it. So when you begin to hear words like that about a piece of medical equipment that's going to go into your body, we quickly decided that we were going to go home instead.
I thought I might get a rusty one.
From an old Maasai,
yeah. One taken out of a Maasai, an old Maasai, straight into me. So we were told by Elim at that point,
come home,
get on a plane, and so we did.
Yeah, so August the 6th we landed back in Tanzania, ready for these next 3 years, and then on August the 28th I wrote in my diary, well, this week didn't start out as we envisioned, as we wished. John passed away. No, passed out. Yeah. John passed out. Sorry,
I'm a miracle.
John passed out in the early hours of this morning. We went to the clinic to see Mark. We were very grateful to see him. And then we had the test in Nairobi. And then by September 2000, we were back in the UK, and we went straight to A&E in Blackpool, didn't we?
Yeah, I went
get
straight
you sorted.
in.
Straight in.
Literally, on the day we arrived back, I was in Blackpool A&E and taken into cardio care.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was scary.
Yeah.
I was setting off machines, and, you know, several doctors around my bed, and I was trying to say, you know, am I dying? You know, what's wrong? And it was just so much, you know. You can imagine a 9-10 hour flight from, we got in Nairobi actually, didn't we? And then, you know, back up to Blackpool when we got to the UK and straight into hospital. From Tanzania to Blackpool, Victoria Hospital, and coronary care unit I ended up in, and got wired up as you do and all of that stuff. And it was the beginning of a very, very dark period of our lives that is very even difficult to speak about. It's so dark because we imagined that I'd get treatment, maybe an operation.
Quickly, wasn't it?
Yeah, and we'd be
Just
going
go
back to Tanzania. That was the thought. We were staying with Deb's parents, and we didn't realise they were fantastic, but we didn't realise that we were going to enter almost a year of utter darkness. That we lost everything that we had. We lost our home in Africa, the kids' school in Africa, our role in Elim, and the worst of it was I was convinced I was just waiting to lose my life.
Yeah.
So what happened was that I got stabilised on medication after a while. I was in hospital for a while, and what they said was, you know, if we think you're strong enough, go back to Tanzania with the medication you're on, and the right time we'll call you in. Just you know, you'll have to get an Elim agreed to it. But what happened was, I went to meet with Dennis Phillips, our regional boss, and Brian Edwards, the missions director.
I came to that meeting, didn't I?
No, not that one.
Oh no,
this was the day when I was, and so they agreed. Yeah, we'll do that. We'll bring you back, and you know, carry on, and you know, if you feel strong enough. And that night I was wrongly medicated. I had to go back and see my GP, and they put me on another medication, and they should have taken me off one and put me on another, and I was supposed to have gone into hospital on the new one and be monitored. That's how they did it in that area of Britain at the time. But I started on another dose of medicine, and it nearly stopped my heart.
Yeah.
And so I was phoning around saying, I'm in trouble. I remember getting up, maybe, I don't know if it was the day after or whatever, but once I got on the medication anyway, and thinking, goodness me, my heart's stopping. And what I had was, I'd created a new pathway in my heart, so I had arrhythmia, and a very fast heartbeat, very slow heartbeat. I could be 180 or more in a sitting, you know, just a relaxing position. The lowest I went down to, because I was monitored, of course, was 22 beats. And so I eventually got back into hospital. So the return to Tanzania
didn't happen.
I was in 11 days, and then I had a cardioablation, and I couldn't recover from it. All kinds of things went wrong in our lives, didn't it? Not just me physically. And as I say, we ended a very, very dark period. And it's important to stress that, because we came through it, and we're extremely positive now, and I regained my health and got restored, and I've done everything we've done since. And you may remember one of the first sermons I preached when we came to Newcastle is there's an after.
Yeah.
After what? Well, after this failure that you might have just had, after the illness that God's going to bring you through, after a relationship breakdown, after somebody's done something bad to you,
there's an after.
There's an after. And let me repeat what Ruth Graham said. We're going to close in a moment or two, aren't we? But fear not tomorrow, for God is already there.
Yeah.
Fear not tomorrow, for God is already there. And I can't stress enough that I began last week by our journey, 33 years now into ministry, is it?
Yeah.
Or 33 years since we went to Bible college, haven't we? Over 30 years in ministry, living 9 of those years as missionaries. Our journey has become our story, and as well as our studies and theological training, our story has helped us produce our theology.
Oh yeah, are we still there?
Are we there? Somebody say yes.
Please let us know that we're still talking to you. Went off.
Yeah. So our story's become our theology. if we, whatever we're not, let's just say what we are in God at this stage of our life and ministry, it wouldn't have come if we hadn't stepped out, because we've learned so much by seeking to say yes to God and to follow God. And I once said, when somebody questioned me, I was on a panel, and they said to me, how do you know if God called you to the mission field? How do you know? How do you...
Oh, hello.
Are we back?
We better be quiet soon, because I think we've just opened our door to get to our router. Sorry about that.
Yeah, let me just say that very quickly then. And in stepping out, we've learnt so much. We've been to apply the Word of God into some big situations. I've just described a huge one for us, and we've learnt to be overcomers. And it's one of the greatest things God can teach you, because this life is difficult at times, isn't it? And ministry is difficult.
You went to open the door, so that's all.
Yeah, where do you think I'd gone? All right, I'm back. Hello. And so eventually I started to get, well, it was eventually. I'd gone so far down that I remember jogging round a soccer pitch. I was so weak. This is months into it now. And it was like a major achievement for me. I'd done a marathon when I was younger, so can you imagine? I was cheering because I'd actually got round the perimeter of a soccer pitch. So thought I'd been raptured.
I don't know what that says about me, Matt.
Yeah, I'd gone and Dev was still here.
Oh, no.
Yeah, so...
I think... I've just been thinking about our story, and this part of it is quite tough to speak and to talk about, because there were so many dark times, and I just get this sense of when you go through the door of salvation, you have a choice, and sometimes on the journey it's like skating on an ice rink, and I've said this before, and the birds are singing and everything's wonderful, and the skies are blue and the sea's beautiful and it's lovely and warm. And then other times, if you're on an adventure with God, other times it's like hacking through the jungle because you can't see your hand in front of your face. And it's at those times that if you apply yourself properly, that God is like I get this picture of him stretching you. He's stretching you, stretching your thinking, stretching your ideas, stepping out into the unknown of Tanzania with two little children would to most people seem such an unwise choice. Yeah. Yet for us, in that day especially, for us and for thousands that do it, and for the many that we met who took their children to Africa, it was God's plan for us, and we didn't see it, and we never dreamt of it. We didn't dream one day we'll go to Africa, but that's been our ministry, and we'll get into that next week, because we must close because we've been going for just about an hour. But you have a choice. You can stay at the door and stay safe in your tent with your barbecue and your gazebo, like we've talked about on Brave, or you can pick up your sword, if you like, and say, well, whatever I go through, it's going to be an adventure. And sometimes that adventure are very tough times, but if you apply yourself properly, you learn and you overcome it.
Keep your heart right.
Yeah.
Christmas of that year, this is just a little bit, we are coming to a close here, guys. Thanks for staying with us. I was keeping a diary. Year? This is 2000, end of 2000, coming into 2001. And so we're several months into this darkness now, and I wrote, I'm not going to read it all, but just to give you an idea of where I'd gone to and seeing the kind of positive me now, this is what I wrote. I was in despair. My beloved family, how I love you all and need you. I can't begin to tell you the torture and torment that is going on inside me at the moment. I've taken so much for granted, and now it seems I've lost it. How I plead with God to give me another chance to get back to normal living. My mind is in such turmoil. My need of sleep and rest is obvious. I'll say a bit more, and I said, how I wish I could be me. and joining the Christmas festivities wholeheartedly. My lack of sleep is dampening my enthusiasm because of the prospect of tomorrow. Only God knows if there is a way forward out of this mess. I need help, and I'm so grateful to have a loving family around me. You have all been better than words could describe. The fruit shown by your mum and dad have proven them to be giants in my sight. Thank you, Chris and Beth. I plead with God that he will allow me to share your tomorrows. You are fantastic, my angels. And I go on to write more to Deb, which is very kind of emotional stuff, because I was convinced that I wasn't going to live, and it had ended so terribly. And but
we're here.
Yeah, resurrection life is available.
Yes.
One thing I did, and I would suggest this: I never turned on God. I never complained. I never blamed God.
Never got angry at God.
I never got angry at God.
It's a mistake.
I did the opposite. I prostrated myself almost nightly before him and said, Lord, and I let him point things out to me and repented of stuff and dealt with stuff from my past. And the worst of all was, I mentioned earlier about talking to someone this week about absorbing the lie of the enemy. I literally went to a place where I thought God had given up on me and he wouldn't forgive me. And it was an absolute lie. Maybe I'll tell you how I realised it was a lie next week. Anyway, that's the first part. The first
that was
time.
1997 to 2001.
It was, indeed.
Thank you for being with us.
Yeah.
Hope you enjoyed Jackanory Hour. We love you. Thank you for watching. Have a great rest of the evening.
And if you haven't been past the building in the last couple of days,
goodness,
we want to tell you there are 5 windows.
Go see it. Actually, no, you can't see it yet.
Beaming light into
scaffolding is still there,
the building.
It's coming.
So, yeah. God
Good
bless
night,
you guys. Love you. Love doing life with you. Every blessing. Good
See
night.
ya.
God bless. Bye.